50%. That is the number that could shatter the global economy by the end of the week. The White House has just drawn an absolute red line, and it is pointed squarely at Beijing. According to emerging intelligence reports, China is quietly preparing to hand over a highly advanced air defense shield directly to Tehran. This is not a standard arms deal. This is a calculated move to close Iranian airspace, neutralizing Western strike capabilities, and fundamentally altering the balance of power in the Middle East. President Trump has responded with the financial equivalent of a nuclear strike, threatening a crippling 50% tariff across the board on Chinese imports if the transfer proceeds. The Great Game has just accelerated. Two superpowers are now locked in a high-stakes standoff over the fortification of a third. The fallout from this single transaction could trigger a supply chain collapse and a regional military escalation simultaneously. Welcome to the Al1 Intelligence Briefing. We do not deal in panic, and we do not deal in political theater. We deal in the cold, hard realities of global leverage and strategic vulnerability. Today, we are analyzing a critical flashpoint that merges the deployment of advanced military hardware with the sheer, crushing weight of weaponized economic statecraft. The geopolitical chessboard is expanding, and the pieces are moving far faster than the public is being told. When the world's largest economic power threatens to bring the world's industrial manufacturing hub to a grinding halt over surface-to-air missile systems in the Persian Gulf, you are witnessing the absolute raw mechanics of superpower confrontation. Let us dissect the data. The reality on the ground is stark. Iran is currently operating with a compromised sky. Recent localized conflicts and precision strikes have exposed severe vulnerabilities in Tehran's existing air defense network. They are relying on an aging mix of Russian S-300s and domestically produced variants. But against fifth-generation stealth platforms, specifically the F-35 Lightning II and advanced standoff munitions, this net is simply too porous. Tehran is desperate. They know that without an impenetrable domestic shield, their critical military infrastructure, their command centers, and most importantly, their nuclear enrichment facilities, remain entirely exposed to a preemptive strike. Russia, traditionally Iran's primary arms supplier, is heavily bogged down in its own strategic quagmire. Moscow simply does not have the excess production capacity to rush top-tier interceptor batteries to the Persian Gulf. That leaves exactly one superpower with the industrial base, the technological sophistication, and the geopolitical audacity to fill the void: China. Intelligence channels have been flashing red for weeks. According to defense monitors, we are looking at satellite reconnaissance and signals intelligence pointing toward the preparation and packaging of advanced Chinese anti-access and area denial platforms. Defense analysts strongly suspect the system in question involves variants of the HQ-9 long-range surface-to-air missile, or potentially the HQ-22. The HQ-9 is no legacy weapon. It is a highly capable active radar homing interceptor, boasting an operational range of over 250 kilometers. It is specifically designed to track and neutralize high-value airborne targets, low-flying cruise missiles, and modern fighter aircraft. The logistics of such a transfer would require heavy airlift capabilities, likely utilizing Iranian heavy transport aircraft flying direct routes from Western Chinese air bases, or heavily obscured maritime shipping through the Strait of Malacca and into the Arabian Sea. The Pentagon has been watching these corridors relentlessly. If these batteries are successfully transported, integrated, and brought online across the Iranian plateau, the strategic calculus for Washington and its allies fundamentally changes. It forces the United States into a much higher risk operational profile. Neutralizing these systems would require a massive, sustained campaign to suppress enemy air defenses, drastically increasing the potential for American personnel losses and severe aircraft damage. It raises the cost of intervention to a level that Beijing hopes will serve as an absolute deterrent against Western action in the region. The White House caught wind of the logistics. The intelligence was placed on the president's desk, and the retaliation was instantaneous. President Trump did not respond with a strongly worded State Department memo or targeted sanctions on a handful of Chinese defense contractors. He bypassed standard diplomatic protocols and went straight for the jugular, threatening a staggering 50% tariff on all Chinese imports. You must understand the scale of this countermeasure. A 10% tariff is a warning shot. A 20% tariff is a trade dispute. A 50% tariff is an act of total economic warfare. This is an engineered shockwave designed to instantly disable the Chinese export machine. The United States remains the most lucrative consumer market on the planet. By weaponizing market access to this extreme degree, the administration is calculating that Beijing cannot absorb the financial hemorrhage. We are talking about hundreds of billions of dollars in Chinese electronics, automotive parts, machinery, and consumer goods hitting a solid brick wall at American ports. For Beijing, this is a worst-case scenario. Their domestic economy is already navigating significant structural headwinds, a fragile real estate sector, and slowing domestic consumption. The Chinese Communist Party relies on export-driven growth to maintain internal stability and employment. A sudden 50% levy would force massive factory closures, sever global supply chains, and create immediate socio-economic turbulence across their critical manufacturing hubs. This is the essence of realpolitik. The United States is effectively holding the Chinese economy hostage over a military deployment in the Middle East. It is a brutal, high-stakes gamble. Washington is betting that Beijing cares more about the survival of its industrial base than it does about Iranian airspace. The message is absolute. Do not hand over the shield, or we will financially dismantle your export market. The countdown has started. Why would Beijing risk a devastating trade war over a patch of desert thousands of miles from its own borders? To understand this, you must stop looking at Iran as an isolated rogue state and start viewing it as a critical piece on the macro chessboard. For China, Iran is the ultimate geopolitical wedge. It is a vital anchor in the Middle East, a key node in the Belt and Road Initiative, and a primary antagonist to American hegemony. The calculus in Beijing is cold and calculated. The Chinese military apparatus understands that as long as the United States is bogged down in the Middle East, pouring resources, carrier strike groups, and strategic focus into the Persian Gulf, Washington cannot execute a true, overwhelming pivot to the Indo-Pacific. By arming Tehran, China is effectively buying time and space in its own backyard. Supplying the Iranian regime with an impenetrable sky is a relatively cheap asymmetric investment for Beijing. It forces the Pentagon to continuously allocate multi-billion-dollar assets to a region that China wants kept in a state of perpetual, simmering instability. But the leverage goes deeper than just military distraction. It is rooted in raw energy mathematics. China is the largest importer of crude oil on the planet. According to energy sector analysts, Beijing relies heavily on massive volumes of heavily discounted Iranian crude, transported daily through an intricate network of shadow fleet tankers. If a regional conflict erupts and American or allied air power neutralizes Iranian oil terminals and refineries, global energy prices will skyrocket. More importantly, China's manufacturing sector would face catastrophic energy shortages. By deploying advanced surface-to-air missiles, Beijing is not just arming an ally. They are placing a hardened steel shield over their own vital energy supply chains. It is an insurance policy enforced by radar-guided interceptors. We must examine exactly how this hardware alters the regional balance of power. For over 3 decades, the United States and its allies have operated with the luxury of uncontested air superiority across the Middle East. If deterrence failed, an aerial kinetic strike was an immediate, low-risk, high-reward option. That era of impunity evaporates the second an HQ-9 battery achieves operational status. The Iranian airspace immediately transforms from a permissible environment into a highly lethal kill web. Consider the tactical nightmare this creates for targeting Iran's nuclear enrichment infrastructure. Facilities like Natanz and Fordow are buried deep beneath mountains. Neutralizing them requires massive bunker-busting munitions delivered by heavy bombers, escorted by waves of 5th-generation stealth fighters like the F-22 Raptor and the F-35 Lightning II. If those skies are saturated with advanced Chinese radar frequencies and long-range interceptors, the mathematical risk of the operation goes off the charts. The Pentagon would be forced to execute a massive, sustained campaign, specifically to suppress enemy air defenses before a primary strike could even be authorized. This means launching hundreds of expensive anti-radiation missiles, attempting to blind phased array radars, and accepting a drastically higher probability of sustaining heavy personnel losses and critical impact to multi-million-dollar airframes. The political cost of downed American aviators is a risk that Washington desperately wants to avoid. That is exactly the deterrence Beijing is banking on. Furthermore, for regional powers like Israel and Saudi Arabia, this Chinese missile deployment is a nightmare scenario. Israeli defense doctrine relies heavily on the capability to launch preemptive, precise, and overwhelming air campaigns against existential threats. If Tehran secures a highly advanced Chinese shield, the Israeli Air Force loses a significant portion of its deterrent edge. Moreover, a secure Iranian homeland means Tehran can aggressively expand its proxy operations. If Iranian leadership knows their domestic infrastructure is protected from retaliatory airstrikes, their willingness to greenlight aggressive operations by proxy networks across the Red Sea and the Levant will increase exponentially. The protective umbrella of the Chinese defense grid does not just cover Tehran, it emboldens an entire axis of power. This maneuver is not merely an arms transfer. It is a profound demonstration of force projection. China is using this air defense system as a geopolitical bargaining chip, actively sabotaging American strategic dominance. They are testing the White House, probing the perimeter of American resolve. Will Washington actually pull the trigger on a 50% tariff and risk a global economic recession just to keep Iranian skies open? Or will they blink, allowing Beijing to successfully redraw the security architecture of the Middle East? Let us rotate the lens from the tactical military theater to the arena of total economic warfare. A 50% tariff is not a policy adjustment. It is a financial bunker buster. To understand the gravity of this threat, we must examine the absolute mechanics of weaponized commerce. Washington knows that direct military strikes against Chinese mainland assets or maritime shipping are completely off the table. The risk of rapid, uncontrollable nuclear escalation is simply too absolute. Therefore, the battlefield has shifted entirely to the global supply chain. If the Oval Office executes this executive order, the cost of Chinese goods entering American ports does not just shift, it effectively doubles overnight. The economic velocity of this action would be devastating. Major retailers and defense contractors alike will instantly cancel outstanding orders. Multinational corporations will be forced to sever long-standing contracts. The entire Trans-Pacific logistics network, moving trillions of dollars of cargo, will suffer a catastrophic seizure. For the ruling apparatus in Beijing, this threat strikes at the very foundation of their domestic security. Their internal social contract relies almost entirely on continuous economic expansion and mass industrial employment. A sudden engineered collapse of their most lucrative export market would trigger an immediate cascade of factory closures across Shenzhen, Guangzhou, and the entire eastern seaboard. Tens of millions of manufacturing jobs could be neutralized in a matter of months. Financial analysts project that a sustained 50% levy would wipe out critical profit margins entirely, sending unstoppable shockwaves through the Chinese banking sector. This is a sector already dangerously over-leveraged by a failing, debt-ridden real estate market. Washington is betting everything on this vulnerability. They are calculating that the internal socio-economic turbulence this tariff creates will force Beijing to abandon the Iranian missile transfer just to survive the fiscal quarter. But make no mistake, this strategy is the economic equivalent of mutually assured destruction. The White House is fully aware of the immense collateral damage this weapon will inflict on its own soil. Imposing a blanket 50% tariff means the American consumer and the American industrial base will absorb a massive, immediate inflationary shock. The cost of advanced electronics, automotive components, pharmaceutical precursors, and heavy machinery will surge dramatically. This is the absolute definition of a high-pain threshold strategy. The administration is openly gambling that the American economy, bolstered by domestic energy production and a robust service sector, is resilient enough to absorb the systemic shock, while the Chinese export engine will stall and fracture. It is a brutal, high-stakes game of economic chicken played with the global gross domestic product used as leverage. Beijing, however, is far from defenseless in this arena. If forced into a corner, they will not simply absorb the blow and retreat. They will retaliate asymmetrically, and they will target America's deepest strategic vulnerabilities. China controls the ultimate choke point of the modern era: critical minerals. Currently, over 80% of the global rare earth element processing capacity is completely dominated by the Chinese industrial base. These specialized materials, elements like gallium, germanium, and antimony, are not just utilized in civilian smart devices. They are the absolute, irreplaceable lifeblood of the American military-industrial complex. You cannot build a single F-35 Lightning II stealth fighter without them. You cannot manufacture advanced phased array radar modules, submarine acoustic sensors, targeting lasers, or precision-guided standoff munitions without unhindered access to these specific elements. If Washington drops the financial hammer, intelligence suggests Beijing's immediate corresponding counterstrike will be a total embargo on these critical mineral exports to the United States. They will attempt to actively paralyze American defense production in direct retaliation for the tariff. Furthermore, Beijing holds over $800 billion in United States Treasury securities. In a doomsday economic scenario, China could begin rapidly dumping these assets onto the open market. This would strategically devalue the dollar and cause American interest rates to spike violently, throwing the U.S. housing market and corporate debt structures into absolute chaos. This is the tangled, terrifying web of modern superpower conflict. A localized, classified dispute over moving air defense batteries into the Persian Gulf instantly morphs into a struggle for control over global supply chains, rare earth minerals, and sheer economic survival. The world's two largest economies are currently standing over a detonator, actively testing each other's pain tolerance. The global market is holding its breath, because if this red line is crossed, the ensuing trade war will fundamentally restructure the financial architecture of the planet for decades to come. But do not make the fatal strategic error of focusing exclusively on the Middle East. While Washington and Beijing lock horns over the Persian Gulf and the impending specter of global financial collapse, a secondary front is rapidly expanding. This entire Iranian missile maneuver is, in reality, a massive diversionary tactic designed to pull American strategic bandwidth away from the Pacific. As we monitor the potential airlift of HQ-9 batteries to Tehran, recent open-source satellite imagery reveals a highly coordinated surge in Chinese naval activity on the other side of the globe. Over the past 72 hours, advanced Type 055 guided missile destroyers and amphibious assault platforms have aggressively increased their operational tempo, probing defenses within the Taiwan Strait and the contested waters of the South China Sea. The strategy is brilliantly sinister. It is a dual-front pressure campaign. By fortifying Iranian airspace and destabilizing the Middle East, Beijing forces the Pentagon into a strategic nightmare. If the United States Pacific Command is forced to detach critical carrier strike groups and reposition them to the Arabian Sea to counter an emboldened, heavily shielded Iran, Taiwan is instantly left dangerously exposed. The American military apparatus, despite its overwhelming budget, cannot effectively sustain two high-intensity simultaneous conflicts against heavily armed peer adversaries. Its logistical chains will stretch, fracture, and ultimately snap under the sheer weight of a two-ocean commitment. Beijing understands this arithmetic perfectly. They are intentionally creating a dilemma for the Pentagon, and in geopolitics, problems have solutions, but dilemmas only offer agonizing choices. The 50% tariff threat originating from the Oval Office is not merely a localized retaliation for a single arms sale. It is a desperate, sweeping attempt to maintain global deterrence across all theaters. Washington is signaling an absolute red line, demonstrating a willingness to intentionally crash the global supply chain before it allows the current security architecture to be systematically dismantled. The chessboard is fully set, the assets are deployed. A single miscalculation, one intercepted maritime shipment, or one enacted executive order, and the geopolitical simulation ends, plunging the global order into an uncontrollable spiral. Stay sharp. The timeline is accelerating and the stakes are absolute. We will continue to process the data as it breaks. This concludes the Aluan Intelligence Briefing.